English, and I haven't presented it for a while, so bear with me when I'm struggling to find the texts and the data. Also, I have a little struggle with my setup since my laptop went into repair. So I tried to do that with the phone and with the iPad. And since Elder Pamina recommended to be visible, I leave the video on, but I'm not going to use the whiteboard. I think I can use a digital whiteboard. I hope this setup will work. And all right, anyways. You asked to make question and answers at the end. Personally, I don't have an issue if you asked in between. But as you wish, we can do it either way. Maybe we stick to the idea to have clarification questions or correction of errors on my side during the presentation if there are more general questions where you want me to say something. So we can leave that for the end. All right. Okay. I ask you then to pray with me. Heavenly Father, I praise you. I thank you for this day. I thank you for this possibility to be connected with my dear brethren in Jamaica and Canada. Heavenly Father, thank you that we have this time, and I ask you for your blessing and your help in this presentation. Help me to choose the words and remember everything that I want to share and say, so that this may turn out to be a blessed study, helpful, direct the minds and understanding of my brethren. So we leave everything in your hand, Heavenly Father, in Christ's name, amen. I would like to talk to you about hermeneutics, or as we call it, methodology. And it has been a burden for me to speak about, or to think about it, and to understand this topic, like many years ago. I studied theology, as many of you know, but I basically forgot everything, because when I was joining the movement, I get rid of all these modern things that I learned. And basically for years and years, I have tried to unlearn. Only now, I think as a movement, and me personally, I remember some things and recognize some things are not that bad, actually, but also important. They're just common sense. So it fit into my desire to understand some things, because one of the biggest things I've been struggling with in this movement, although I really always appreciated all the studies by Brother Parminder, and actually the new methodology called parable teaching that he introduced into this movement. What I struggle with is a little bit to have a more systematical approach to our methodology. I'm the kind of person who had really issues with mathematics in school, because I didn't know what for. This question I always had as a young man, as a boy. Why do I need this? What is it for? And I remember that teachers had an issue answering. I did study Latin, and my question was, what for? And I asked the question, the answer was, you need this to enter if you want to study medicine, for example. And as I knew that I didn't want to study medicine, I didn't want to become a medical doctor, I understood I just don't need it. Okay, it doesn't make sense to study Latin if this is the reason why I would need it. So when we started to have studies on methodology or hermeneutics or exegesis, as we call it more specifically when it comes to biblical hermeneutics, my question was, what he's teaching right now, for example, compare and contrast, where does it fit in the whole logic of things, of how we should proceed and how we should study? So let me try to share here screen, and if you could enable this for me, please. This would be
which one do you want me to enable?
The libretto account.
There's two librettos. The one without audio. Let me see.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Let me know if that works for you.
Yes.
And I'll just make you a co-host as well, just in case you need to do anything else.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
So you don't put your cameras on. Is this a setup that you established, or is it just because nobody
it's oh, sorry, it's more so a bandwidth thing.
All right.
Yeah, just because the internet in Jamaica is not the best, and
I figured it's the same issue I have in some other countries.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So we have learned things like compare and contrast. My question was, what is this? If I do this, I felt kind of loose within the systematic approach of understanding a Bible text. We have line upon line. We learned to find the most important word in a sentence, or the most important idea to understand the whole. And of course, you remember many more techniques that Brother Hermeneutics taught us. One of the things he has been saying a lot recently, more and more, is that this is one little aspect in what we should do, or things like that we are quite far away from a professional hermeneutical approach, or this is pretty lay net level, that what if we come to this text, or we need to understand a little bit more about grammar, language, in order to really come close to the correct understanding of the text. So of course this left me a little bit uncomfortable, because I need to understand what I'm doing here. At least for me, for myself, I need the structure. So I try to find the structure on what actually methodology is about, or how does it work, and what is it? Because one of the things that I came to understand like years ago is that methodology, or hermeneutics, the art, the technique, the scholarship on how to understand a text, how to understand the biblical text, is not something that every generation or every reformatory movement has to invent newly. So we take some things from the Millerites. The Millerites basically gave us 14 rules. But these 14 rules, what are they? They are rules, but this is everything I need to know. No, it's not. But the Millerites, they have a heritage. They took a lot from the Protestants, etc. The Protestants took something from previous generations. So in my understanding, every generation, every reformatory movement adds a new aspect of methodology to biblical methodology or biblical hermeneutics, but it does not reinvent everything. Perhaps easy to understand is this is the example of the Protestants. If we have Luther, what Luther's problem was is that the people, the majority of people in Germany, in German-speaking countries, they could not understand the Bible because the Bible was in Latin. So the Bible in Latin obviously only was for scholars, was only for priests, was for a minority of people who could read it, could understand it. So what he did and what others did in their languages is translate into their language. By this, he did something very important. What his new approach was in methodology is the question, can we trust in the Latin translation, which was the Vulgate translation? Can we just trust in this translation? Can we just take it for granted as the best text? Or perhaps we should ask some questions. And what he did and what his methodological approach was for his reformatory movement was this critical approach. Yes? A critical approach to understanding of the Bible. So obviously, if we cannot trust the Latin necessarily, or if we don't even know if we can trust it, then we need to go back further. We need to go to the original texts. And this meant we have to go, we'll talk about this, I tried to talk about this a little bit more in detail. We have to go about the Old text of the Old Testament, which is basically the Masoretic text. And we have to go to the oldest texts, the original texts, or the most original text, most close to the original text of the New Testament, which in his case was basically the Textus Receptus, or the received text. So important for his generation, for his movement was, if it comes to understand the Bible, you need to skip basically the existing translations. You need to skip the Latin Vulgate. Then you need to go to the best texts that we have previous to the Latin Vulgate. And from this text, then he did his translation, a new translation, the Luther Bible into German. Okay, 1500 something. This is important procedure, but when it comes to our generation now, the question is, do we do the same thing, or do we need to do the same thing, or do we not? All right, so I understand that he did this for us. He and then the other languages, the other Protestant translators did this process for us already. They had this critical approach to the Bible, and they produced new translations. Now, there's so many, tons of biblical translations in several languages. There's so many different translations in English. There are Protestant translations of the Bible, and then there are revisions of those initial Protestant translations of the Bible. So I believe that in a grand perspective, in a big perspective, the work of Martin Luther is kind of obsolete for our generation. We don't have to do the very same thing, at least not in this needful, basic approach that you cannot skip. He could not refer to any other Bible. His generation could not say, okay, take this one, this is better than the Vulgate. No, they had to do this. We don't need to do this because it has been done for us already. Which means we can trust modern translations. And maybe you say, I trust in the King James, or you say, I trust in the New King James. or in the New International Version, or American Standard Version, etc., etc., etc. All right. Well, we have to look into this a little bit more in detail now. If this is also a good idea. But what I wanted to say with this little example is that every generation has its necessities, and every reformative movement takes something which it has been done, has been worked out for it already from other reformative movements, but it also adds new things. So we add parable teaching, but this doesn't mean that we can forget everything that has been done, that we don't need to understand. And this is partially what Parminder is introducing. Many of the concepts that he's introducing, like compare and contrast, or juxtaposition, these terms, all right, on how to read a text and what to look at the text, he did not invent this. He did not come up with it. He did not discover this. This is something that is old. It's theological basics of hermeneutics. He just rediscovered it for us. Okay, for us it's new material. So some who have investigated may be surprised when they find these works in theological literature. Okay, and initially when we were still quite conservative, it looked kind of bad. We see someone using theological terms, all right? But I think we overcame these questions, these problems by now. All right, so trying to give hermeneutics for our movement the structure, I share with you how I understand how the whole topic of hermeneutic works. And first, it has basically 3 steps. Bible hermeneutics. You remember, hermeneutic means the art of understanding text. Hermeneutics is not used solely for Bible understanding, but for every kind of literature. You have to apply hermeneutics to understand it. If you have studied literature at university or at school, then you apply hermeneutics. You need to understand what the text means, what the author wanted to say, and the same thing is valid for the Bible. There's also this term of exegesis. It's not limited actually to the Bible, but as I understand, it's basically hermeneutics, but for the Bible. So when you see people speak about exegesis, it's mostly used only in relationship to the Bible. The work of understanding the Bible and going to the original texts, doing all type of critical analysis. So we could speak about exegesis here. But the movement chose to speak about methodology, which is not that specific, I think, or not that correct, because there are tons of methods. But when we speak about methodology, we mean hermeneutics. All right, anyway. So I wanted to say that there, in my understanding, on my logic, there are 3 main steps. And of course, these are very big in itself. But the first would be to establish the text. If you want to understand a verse, if you want to understand the story in the Bible, you need to establish what are the limits of the text you want to understand. This may not be, we may not be aware of this, but this is extremely important. Part of the establishing of the text is what Elder Parminder called a natural reading. I think he says a natural reading. Someone can correct me if I remember wrong. So if you want to have a text, we want to understand a verse we don't understand or it seems interesting, we just cannot stop and say, I take this verse, this single verse. What I have to do, I have to study out if it is correct to limit my study to this verse. Maybe, probably, I need to incorporate more verses in order to really be able to understand this single verse. Maybe I need to incorporate the chapter. Maybe the chapter is not a good guide, because when the chapters were established, they had their reasons to establish, to select certain texts, and sometimes the logic of a text goes beyond the chapter. Maybe I need to read the whole book in order to be able to understand this very single verse I initially started to understand, initially intended to understand. So establishing the text is an important first big step. There are Bibles in English that don't have chapters, that don't have verses, as it was originally. This is maybe a good exercise in order to really focus on what is being said in the text. Because if you don't have chapters, if you don't have verses, you need to determine by yourself how to find this, the logical limits of a text. So what helps here, and I'm not intending to go too much into detail into all of these steps, because you'll see it's just way too much. But this is kind of important, I think, and we can kind of easily do. What we need to do is common sense. The beginnings and ends of a story. If it's a story that's continuing something that has been said before, you need to go further, you need to go there. So you'll see what the limits are. Oftentimes, or perhaps mostly, the verses and the chapters are a good help. They make sense, but maybe you need to go beyond that sometimes. And the natural reading means you read and you try not to, and this is very important, you try not to make applications. We are too much conditioned to make applications, to read everything as an application. But we have been learning in this movement that this is not a good first step. You know, we need first to have the text as neutral as possible, to see it not through a tinted glass, but just as it is, which is difficult, of course, which is very difficult, but we have to try our best, not to make applications, not to think that this text has been written for us. Try to understand who it has been written for, etc. So this first text is basically the basics in order to proceed, because once you have the text, once you determine the limits of your text, you can continue. And this is the second step, and this is the text analysis. So the text analysis is the biggest part of the study. What Parminder has been teaching us recent years is basically elements of text analysis. I see if I can give a little bit more context here. Okay. Oh, no, the document is not downloaded yet. Give me bear with me. I'll give you the details here. Text analysis, or maybe yes. Maybe I have it here. There you go. Okay. Hermeneutics, step 1. So this is an index of something that I've started to write with the help of some other brethren. And you see what I've been saying. First step in hermeneutics is establishing the text. And I come back to this because I want to give more details into problems that we have with establishing the text. Basically, problems that we have with the biblical text in itself. Second step is hermeneutics, and hermeneutics is text analysis. And this has all these sub-steps, like a lexical analysis, a grammatical analysis, a form analysis, structural analysis. We've been doing a lot inside structure, okay? So historical, literary, biblical analysis. So also the relationship of this text to other texts. There's so many elements within this particular step of understanding or of hermeneutics. And I think we will come to this point where we'll be able to categorize what we've been doing a little bit better. Then there are the rules. What I've been struggling kind of a lot with the rules. What are they? You know, where do we place them? What are rules anyway? Are there rules of text analysis? Are there rules, mirrors rules? What are they? You know, not all of them are actually hermeneutical directives or procedures that we can bind into like a methodological study of a text. But they're important to us. How can we understand them? There are so many questions actually, and this is a big study which continues to grow, at least in my mind. There's so many facets to it. But just jumping here a little bit, if we speak about Synecdoche, yes, this is part of a form analysis of the text. It's a figure of speech, all right? It's not something that stands there, or metonymy. No, sorry, these are grammatical issues, grammatical things that we are evaluating when we do this. Or if we do form analysis, then what we are doing, if we understand the form, is something that I recently just looked into. So we try to understand what genre this Bible is. Of, I don't know how you say it in English. It would be gender. Yeah, what literary form we are reading. Is it wisdom? Is it poetry? Of course, it makes a big difference if it's a parable, if it's a riddle, if it's a dialogue, or if it's a prophetical text, apocalyptical text, because there are certain rules within. And then you should ask, if you have wisdom, or if you have poetry, can you just compare it with another text that is a fable, for example? Can you do that? Is it correct to compare inside the Bible texts that are from different literary types? I think we haven't looked into this yet. In my mind, it makes sense to compare things that are on the first level comparable. So if you want to compare a psalm, then you should compare with a psalm. Or if you have a prophecy, you compare with a prophecy. So you do justice to the type form. Okay, I've been asked if I can share this text. I submitted this text to the elders of the movement. So at the moment, I'm awaiting feedback before I'll share this document. Maybe my conclusions or others' conclusions are not need to be corrected. Some instances, I would be glad to share it with you right now, but I prefer that the elders have a look at it, give their opinion, and then for sure you will have it as soon as it is available. It's good to go. I was interested in these kind of things. For example, structure. Yes, we have looked a lot into structure. You remember cause and effect, juxtaposition, all these things. And to me, it helps. What is it what I'm doing if I look at cause and effect? And it's a structural investigation on my text. Okay, so I know this is part of the second big step, which I call, what is it? Which is a study of, which is a text analysis. All right, so here there, as you have seen, there are so many subtopics that we can look at. And if we say sometimes, okay, so we have the text, let's do compare and contrast. We look at this because it has been a newly presented detail on hermeneutics. We do not do a good hermeneutics when we do this. Oftentimes, in our approach, it reduces our hermeneutical steps to the newest things that have been presented in the movements, to the latest things that Brother Paminda shared with us. But as you can see, I think as you can understand by now, this would not be correct. We have to, and remember that Sister Tess also reminded us, make sure you incorporate other things like look into the context of the text, the history, etc. So, all right. So compare and contrast, line upon line is not everything. Line upon line is there. This is a part, important step for our movement. It's part of text analysis, but there are more things to respect. There's a third step, which is the step that we oftentimes have done almost at the very beginning, and this is then the application. So if we have an understanding what the text means in its history, means in its time, means in the time of the reapplication, perhaps in the New Testament, the reapplication of the Old Testament, or in reinterpretation of an Old Testament in the New Testament. If we understand what the prophet originally meant, etc., what the grammar can tell us about the meaning of the text, what the form, the textual form can tell us about the text, then we are ready at the end of the day to make an application. And as you see, if you want to do justice to a text, don't be afraid because it seems to be complicated, but it makes sense to dig deeper. Yes, and therefore we need also a little bit of preparation. All right. We said in the beginning that Luther said, okay, wait a minute, you can't do this. Yes, you can't do this because the text that you have in front of you, the Latin Vulgate, you can't trust in this text. And sometimes theologians or, yes, Bible critics have a similar attitude. They say, okay, you can't do this. You need to go to the Hebrew. You need to go to the Greek. And it sometimes looks like if we have to do this. Sometimes we have this impression that actually we need to jump to the text and we need to dig it out from the original. This is why we use dictionaries. And we go to dictionaries, Strong's dictionary, for example. Then we learned there are others, Brown Drivers Briggs. And what else we used? This was the Old Testament, right? And there was in text, and there was on a dictionary we've been using the New Testament. Someone remembers? The one that has been recommended. We find in Bible Sword for free. Anyways.
You mean eSword?
In eSword, yes. There's been a second dictionary been suggested.
Well, there's the Brown Driver Briggs. In terms of lexicons, there's Brown Driver Briggs, there's Thayer's, and there's
Thayer's.
Strong's. Those are the three main ones, yeah.
Okay. Thayer's. So these dictionaries, they became important for us, but basically they are important for us because, I would say, because of two reasons. They are free. You don't need to pay anything for it. And for this reason, you do not get actually the whole. Yes, when you get Brown Drivers Briggs in eSword, you get a abridged version. It's not the complete version. And it's free because it's very, very, very old. It's from the, I believe it's 19th century, 1800 something. Same thing with Thayer's, 1911 or something like that, or the other way around. They are very old because this is why they are free. If they are very old, this is not a problem. It doesn't mean they are good. They are very good. Both of them are very good. But in biblical hermeneutics, no one is using these any longer. But today they are just better ones. They are better because biblical hermeneutics has evolved. They found new texts that haven't been available on that time in the 19th century. And because our understanding of linguistics, of language, of the Hebrew, of the Greek language has also evolved quite a lot. So today there are other dictionaries, better dictionaries. In Hebrew it's called the Halot dictionary. But the problem with these, they are not free. Yes, so the Halot I think costs $250 or something dollars if you want to get a reduced or a cheaper version, digital version. And there's another one, I can dig it up. I don't remember at the moment, Greek dictionary. This is not so problematic. Yes, it's not so problematic, not at all problematic, I think. For my mind, in my mind, I only think it's good to know. Yeah, it's important to know. You discuss with someone, for example, and you say Brown Driver Briggs, and he says, come on, Brown Driver Briggs, what's this? Oh, this old dictionary. Yeah, so we need to know what we are using in order to, well, for several reasons. So don't be disappointed. Brown Driver Briggs is a very good dictionary. Thayer's are very good dictionaries. They have been used for a long time by the scholars. There are just newer ones by now that are better. All right. So coming back to this issue of the first point, yes, of the first step of the text. The biblical text. There has been this impression that we need to go to actually we can only do justice to an analysis of the biblical text if we understand the Greek. It hasn't been said. Actually, Parminder said it's not necessary, the Greek or the Hebrew, but it's kind of inherent. It's kind of between the lines, because we need to dig out the meaning of the words. This is difficult because, and Parminder has said this also, that if you take a word from that you find in New Testament and you dig out the meaning in Brown Driver Briggs, in Thayer's, then you have the word. But a word has a grammatical variations. Yeah, is it feminine? Is it masculine? Is it neutral? Is it past tenses, the present tense, all these things we usually do not see if we just open up the dictionary. We have just the basic meaning of this word, but it can vary, and it's very important sometimes. If you have the Holy Spirit or God or something that God is doing in feminine, it's a different thing if it's in masculine. These things you do not see if you just open up the dictionary and have no understanding of the language at all. So what this means is that if you want to do justice to the biblical text, it's kind of difficult to have no understanding at all of the original languages. I don't understand. I cannot read any of those ancient languages because I didn't understand the importance when I was studying theology, and I didn't study theology so long neither. I participated a little bit in the first courses, then I dropped out. And it was kind of difficult, and I didn't really understand why we need this. In my kind of conservative mindset back then also, unfortunately. But today's scholars do not even say that it is important to know Greek or to know Hebrew. Why? Because there are simply good text translations. So you have, for example, a very important Bible translation, which is the Septuagint or Septuagint. This is the Greek complete Bible, Old Testament. Old Testament. And you have a translation of this into English. Yes. And I share with you. I'm using a Bible tool, which is called Concordance. You see it here on the left corner, upper corner, Concordance. This is a free Bible software, but it's a professional Bible software. What this means that you can get in this Bible software many more things that you can get in eSword, for example. You can, and of course, you can buy most of the apparatus you buy. You have all the tools you need for a biblical study, a scholarly study. I'm using this text here, for example. Let me show you. This is the NETS. This is a Septuagint translation. Let's see, a new English translation of the Septuagint. So you do not need to understand Greek. It's good though if you can read the words in Greek. Yes, it's not too difficult. You can read it, and if you have some basic understanding, and then you already can use the dictionaries properly. All right. So with tools like that today, we have so many more possibilities. You do not really need to understand to learn these languages and therefore overcome this difficult process of studying a language. And once you study it, you need to become kind of a specialist in it to really see what is important. You do not necessarily need that. And scholars today do not necessarily recommend it. At least they say it's not mandatory in order to do a very good exegesis. So you can do that, and you can use tools like this one, a new English translation of the Septuagint. But by the way, the Septuagint, right, is a very old translation of the Bible. It's one of the first translations. It's actually the first translation of the Old Testament. So if we say we have back here 1500 BC, we have the texts of the Bible being written. All right. 900 BC, 700 BC. you have the text as written by the prophet, as written by Moses, or someone who had him write it. All right. So we have these texts, these originals, and what are they called? They're not called manuscripts. They have a different name. I'll remember in a while. I hope. So you have these texts, and of course, none of these original texts survive any longer. You don't have them today. Nobody has them. Nobody saw them for centuries and centuries. But these texts arrived to our generation, arrived to our time period through translation and transportation and copying, etc. And then we have, in the history of translation, what first happened is in time in Babylon, when the Jews were brought into captivity, they unlearned Hebrew, the Hebrew language, and they more and more transitioned to a new language, which is Aramaic. Okay, so because of this situation, the priests and the Bible teachers of the Old Testament, we say Old Testament, but it has actually a name, and it's called the Tanakh. Okay, the Tanakh is the transliteration of the Hebrew word for Old Testament, for what we say Old Testament. These books, which are gathered in the Old Testament, it's the Tanakh. And in order to help the people understand these texts, when the Jews left Israel, Judea, and they learned another language, it was necessary to translate them. And these generations, they needed help, they needed translation, but this translation was not done in a proper way. It was not done formally. It was not done scholarly. Yes, it was like if I would translate something you out of the book right now, and I would give you more or less the meaning of the text as good as I can, because it was not approached like scholarly. Nevertheless, these translations, this were the first translations of the Bible, of the original Tanakh Bible. These translations, they survived. How are they called? They are called Targumim or Targum. You may have seen these words. Plural is Targumim. So these texts, which are the first translations of the Old Testament, let's put it here. This is the Tanakh in Hebrew. And this then was translated into these Targum texts in Aramaic. But these translations were not literal or professional translations. Often they were mixed with the words of the translator. There were more paraphrases. Or also comments. All right. So this was the first step of translation. Then the next important step of translation is what we have with the Septuagint. So this is the history of translation, which is abbreviated the Latin meaning 70. And this is a translation into Greek, or properly ancient Greek. This is translation from the Hebrew. All right. And so this translation into ancient Greek from the Hebrew. This is the first thing that was done, but we are speaking here about the year 300, 200 BC, right? This is the first translation. It's a extremely important translation, and if you've seen, I had it open just now. We have this text today. Just to give a little clarification, the Septuagint is called Septuagint because it is said to have been translated by 70 scholars. But what the 70 scholars, perhaps it was 70, perhaps it was more or less, what they did translate was only the Pentateuch. So this is the first 5 books of Moses, all right? They did not translate, which is Isaiah or Psalms or all the other books. So in this time period, when they did this translation together, they did not translate the whole Tanakh or the whole Old Testament Bible. And in subsequent years, the translation was finished. Okay, so the translation of the Septuagint was not done by 70 only. It was done by more scholars in the upcoming years, decades later. So it took a long process. This is why you see 300 until 200 BC. It's a long story. I just give a little bit of historical feedback, historical background to the Bible translation, because we need to understand a little of this when we come to the selection of the Bible we use. You have lots of Bible in English. This is a very good, this is an advantage. You can choose from very many different Bible approaches, Bible translation approaches, but it's good to know a little bit of the background in order to understand what Bible you would want to use. And once again, what I'm trying to address here is not the text analysis point, which the movement has been focusing on quite a lot. Neither do I focus on the application, which the movement also is doing a lot, and extremely important, of course. But I'm trying to talk a little about this one. And if you establish a text, since we do not speak Greek nor Hebrew, we cannot go to the old texts in the original language. We have to establish also a Bible. Yeah, we have to choose a Bible we want to read from, or Bibles, perhaps. So what I'm saying now, what I'm talking about now is in this category, establishing the text. It has to do with Bible translation. Okay. So when it comes to Bible translation, that's what I've been trying to show. There's this original text in Hebrew. If it comes to the Old Testament, the Tanakh, then you have a first translation, which are the Targumim text into Aramaic. And then you have the first really complete translation into another language, written down, let's say scholarly, in the year of 300, 200 BC. This Septuagint is extremely important for us because it's the text that was available to the New Testament writers. When you have Paul, when he's quoting from the Bible, from what Bible is he quoting? Does he use the Hebrew text? Maybe he has been using some Hebrew text, but you can show that him and others have been using extensively the Septuagint. All right. So the Septuagint in itself has its problems. We know they did not have the best old Tanakh texts available for themselves. But this becomes an interesting. Nevertheless, this Septuagint text has been validated, so to say, by the New Testament writers. Okay. And I think it's very interesting to have a look directly into the Septuagint translation in order to come quite close to the text which the New Testament writers had. The Septuagint text, it's not one book that you can just that's there that you can find, and then you found this scroll of the Septuagint. It's many fragments and manuscripts that are available, and they have to be gathered, and they're from different centuries and put together. And then we have something like we just saw here. This is the Septuagint, a New English translation of the Septuagint. And then in his introduction, the author writes, he says he's using using a very specific Septuagint text. I don't know if I can find it here. Yes. I'm not sure. I think it's the Brunton text or whatever. So it helped me to unlearn certain concepts, or to have some clearer concept on how all this works. It's a really a big scholarly field, and I think it's good to have some understanding of this, and also to value the work of these text critics, because it's just not that easy. The more you read about it, the more complicated it becomes. Because even if you want to understand how translation works, you can choose from so many approaches of translation. Do you do a very a text, a literary translation where you go word by word and you really try just to focus on the correct translation of this very word? Or do you want to make a translation that is understandable in your culture and in your language, where you perhaps use a different symbol in order to convey what is trying to be said? So there are so many different approaches on how you can translate it. Therefore, there's the need of so many different Bibles. They use different ideas or ideologies on how to translate text. Okay, the Septuagint, just put it here in place. And I've been doing this line here. You have the Septuagint in this time period. It's all BC. And then you have the time of Christ. And then you have the Vulgate translation, which is 400 AD. And then you have something that you have heard. I mentioned already, and you have the Masoretic text. The Masoretic text is the Tanakh, is the Old Testament, written by a group of people who were called the Masoretes. They tried to do a very precise copying of the original Bible text, but they did this 700 to 1000 AD. All right. So, as you can envision when you see this Masoretic text is not very old. If you use the Bible, which uses I put it here, the Septuagint, then you have a very much older Old Testament than as if you would use a Bible which translates from the Masoretic text. But there are reasons to trust in the Masoretic text. But I think this is good to see. This is important to see, because it gives us some more sensibility to the problems of Bible translation. So you have here between the Septuagint and the Masoretic text, if you would establish 700, you have 1000 years of Bible translation in between. This is a long time. 1000 years, a millennium. So I thought, I had in my mind, the Masoretic text is the basic of the Old Testament. So there's no question, there's no doubts about it. But then you see it's not that an old text. And what happened then, and I think we have been misguided quite a lot by presentations from evangelicals and from extreme conservative people as Walter Veit or Walter Waite, when he was doing this Battle of the Bible series, where he discredited quite a lot, many important things. For example, the Qumran discoveries, which happened 1947, 53. Commonly, they're called the Qumran text, but scholarly, they're called the desert. How you call it? Desert of Judea. Anyways, but Qumran. Qumran is just one of the places, of the caves that have been discovered where these old texts were. And these texts that you could find there, that they did find there, they are quite old actually. They are much older than this group of texts, which is called the Masoretic text from 700 AD. And these texts from they were called in the desert, the Judean desert, or Qumran, they are from a time period which you can place here. They cover a big range from 250 to 135 AD. All right. I hope I'm not losing you. Maybe I have been losing you already, but we can have some question and answers later on, or in a while, shortly. So what this means is that all of a sudden, in the 20th century, they discover some very old texts. And we're speaking about Tanakh texts, Old Testament. I'm basically speaking only about the Old Testament at the moment. So they uncover these very, very old texts. They're older than any text that has been existed until then. Because what you may have heard is that there's the Aleppo Codex. The Aleppo Codex is the Masoretic text. Then there's the Leningrad Codex, which is also a Masoretic text. These texts are quite old. Aleppo Codex is from 920, but it's not complete. The Leningrad Codex is from 1008, but it's complete. Yes, but it's not that old. So you see, there are really some interesting facts about it. But if you have Bibles who use the Masoretic text, you can see they're not that old. And this also implies something interesting. When has the King James translation been done? It's the 17th century, right? 1600 something. So if you have, let me see if I can rearrange this a little bit. The old texts are from near 1500, way before any translation that we have that has survived. So when you have then a Bible translation in the 17th century, or Luther's translation in the 16th century, right? 1600, 1500. Of course, as you can see, they did not have access to the very old texts, because the older texts were only translated 400 years later. All right, 400, 500 years later. And not only were they only translated by then, but some texts of these desert scroll finds were only put to public, or were established and planned and cleansed and prepared in order to be readable and digitalized, etc. This work, as I understand, of uncovering the Desert Scroll text had also been completed in 2018. All right. So there is an argument that I do not need to explain in detail, but why new translations are necessary and what they are sometimes, at least potentially, better. All right. We cannot speak about the New Testament, the received text, which has a very similar problem. It's not a very good translation, the received text that has been used by the King James, for example. It's many problems, but this is the best text they had in that time. So for this reason, it makes sense to use newer translations that have some better text at their disposal. All right. This doesn't mean that all translations are wrong. And at the end of the day, it comes down to little changes, to little things, to some words sometimes. But it's interesting that the Desert Scrolls have proven that newer translations or newer texts or codices are pretty good, and that many of the translations that we had, they actually are very reliable, because the text has been preserved pretty good over centuries and centuries. Nevertheless, older doesn't mean necessarily better, but it can mean better. And in some instances, it's very helpful to have older texts. For example, when Erasmus from Rotterdam, he produced a received text, this is just a little comment on the New Testament, or the Textus in Latin, Receptus. He had not good manuscripts at his disposal. He didn't have access to the Leningrad Codex or the Aleppo Codex. He just didn't have them. They were not around, or he didn't know them. So he used some translations that they were just not really good in quality. Yes, and you can show this. Scholars can show why a text is not very good in its quality, where does it come from, what is its history, etc. So, and moreover, he had a problem because when he used a manuscript to produce the New Testament, there was no revelation. The book of Revelation was not there. So he needed to use what he did then. He needed to go to a Latin translation. And from the Latin, he retranslated, or backwards translated into Greek. But remember that the Latin was a translation from the Greek. I didn't show this here, but if you have Hebrew, or if you have, at least you have the original Greek, the Koine Greek, and then it was translated into other languages, and from there it was translated into Latin. So he didn't have the Book of Revelation in Greek, so he needed to go to the Latin, the best what he had at his hands, and then he retranslated into Greek. You can already see this is problematic, and it's very difficult that you have a very good outcome. And the text, for example, that says, blessed are those, Revelation 22:14, I believe it is, that wash their clothes, right? Who wash their clothes. This text, for example, this is a product of the wrong translation, of the problems of translation that Erasmus had in order to produce his New Testament, his received text. And if you go to newer translations, it never says, sorry, I'm mistaken here. Let's just go there quickly, just to give this example. So here we have the King James. We go to Revelation 22:14. And it says, blessed are they that do his commandments. Okay. So we open another book here, another Bible. For example, I suggest the notes. Let me take this one here. Yes. In this Bible, you see, this is the ESV. You have, this is a newer translation. It's 1950s or so. You have, blessed are those who wash their robes. And then we would always say, you see, you cannot trust in these Bibles, in these modern Bibles, because they really miss the point. You know, it's washing their robes. What is this? But you have to trust in the King James, because here it clearly says, it makes sense. Blessed are those who keep his commandments. And since we had this focus, we have this focus as Adventists on the commandment of the keeping of the commandments. So this text, just from ideological reasons, becomes for us trustworthy and good, the King James. Whilst the modern translations, and this is what basically Walter White said, all translations after 1910 or something, you can forget them because they're corrupted, because they incorporate all these new discoveries and the new the Qumran text, etc. But these texts actually are better in many instances, and this is a good example here, because the King James Version uses the Textus Receptus. It uses the received text, which, if you study this out, then you see when Erasmus produced this translation, he didn't even have a good manuscript he could rely on, and he had to retranslate it from the Latin, and sometimes he had kind of made it up. So especially in the book of Revelation, the King James has some issues. I hope I could make my point. Not really systematically improving, losing a little bit the whole concept here, but or the structure. But what I'm trying to familiarize you is with the idea that there's validity for newer translations. Okay, let me show here a text, Comparative Study of Bible Translations. I think this is a committee that has been formed, I think, of Lutherans or evangelicals or Protestants who evaluate different Bible translations. I can share this document with you. It's interesting. It gives some information about different Bible translations. But what I wanted to share with you is this graphic. As we have said already, we start with here from the bottom. You have the original manuscripts. And this means you have the Greek here. You have the Greek New Testament written AD 30 to 100. Yes, the time period of the apostles, of the writers of the New Testament. Peter, Paul, etc. They lived in this time span. So more or less in this time period, the New Testament has been written, the original text. The Hebrew, of course, the Hebrew Old Testament is much older. Scholars date this to this time range between 1500 and 400 BC. These original manuscripts, they do not exist, but they have been brought into modern times, and then old translations have been done, oldest copies of the Old Testament. This is the next step here, the Old Testament copies. And this is the Masoretic text in the Dead Sea Scrolls, as I have mentioned already. So from the New Testament, then you have on the left side, you have the Greek manuscripts, and then you have the papyri. They're all from different time periods. Now, when you take a look, for example, at the King James Bible here from 1611, you can trace it back and you can see where does it translate from. All right. And obviously, you do not have this connection here. You do not have the link. They did not have availability of the Dead Sea Scrolls, so they could not have newer texts for their or older manuscripts for their translation. But what they did neither did they have access to the Masoretic or to the original text. To the Greek original manuscripts or oldest manuscripts. So the access to the New Testament of the King James translators comes through the Textus Receptus. So it jumps over this step and does not have access to the Old Testament, to the New Testament text directly. It uses a translation or a united New Testament text, the Textus Receptus, in order to produce its New Testament translation to English. This year are many thousands of separate fragments and manuscripts and text, sometimes quite complete, sometimes only partial. The Dead Sea Scrolls, for example, has only one complete Bible book in its text that has been found in manuscript. This is the famous Isaiah scroll. The rest is not complete books. You only have part of that book, part of Kings, part of Psalms, some Psalms here, etc. You do not. This is one of the big problems. You have many manuscripts and papyri and parts. So of course, there's the necessity of bringing them together and make one book accessible. And this is work that has been done by Erasmus, and he produced the Textus Receptus. So you have the Textus Receptus, you have the complete New Testament in Greek, which he has put together from other sources, translated some things by himself, etc. And this has been used by the King James translators. They did not access the original or the oldest available texts. So therefore, what you see is you have translations, a translation that uses a translation. And this always is a little bit, obviously, problematic. Errors or problems of translation can be included. Okay, so when you say, I use the King James, I trust in the King James because Ellen White used the King James, and it has been God's established word for over 1,000 years, thousands of years. What you basically say is, without knowing or without being conscious of it, I do not want to take into account these new discoveries. I do not take into account this here. I trust in Erasmus. I trust in the Masoretic text. This is all I need. Okay, you make a choice if you go with the King James, and this choice is not. It doesn't really make sense. It's not 100% okay. It's pretty good. It's a good translation, has its strengths, but it's not, as you can just see from this textual approach, from this scholarly approach, or whatever you want to call it. There must be some issues with that, and for these reasons, you have newer translations. And what I would suggest, as we come to close, start using different translations. You have the ESV, which I understand is pretty good. You have the NIV, and these translations, they are actualized. Like the NIV, I think the latest actualization is from 2000. I think I have it here. 11. Yes. And there's also study Bible. So they are, once they discover more things, when they understand better things, they actualize, they revise these versions, and then you have better versions of these Bibles. I just suggest to you, if you still have the approach that you say, okay, I stick with my King James, that's the only Bible I own, that's the Bible I trusted with, I remember the verses because it's a really beautiful English, partially. When it comes to sit down and do a Bible study, you should incorporate other translations. This is the best you can do in the first step. If you are willing and if you are able to invest more time into prepare yourself for Bible hermeneutics, then you should go beyond that and take into account, as I suggested, for example, a good translation of the Septuagint, of the Greek Old Testament. And if you go further than that, if you can, you can start learning how to handle Greek. I'm not saying learning ancient Greek, but you can learn how to read the word and then understand better the commentaries that are made in Strong's or made in the different dictionaries. And then you can even get much more out of the biblical text if you do that. So, resuming, what I've been trying to show is we've been doing many things in our movement. We have improved, we have a new approach on hermeneutics, but I think we have not been aware enough, or we have not been able to formalize in an organized fashion what we've been doing. We do hermeneutics, but we are not really aware what we do. We have some confidence in it. We have actually confidence it's the best hermeneutics, it's the best approach, but we are playing with some elements that we do not really know, do not really understand in itself. Therefore, I believe it's a good idea to get familiar a little bit with the structure, the logic of hermeneutics. And then when we do things like compare and contrast, bear in mind, this is not everything you should do with the biblical text. Yeah, it's a part of the step. It's part, in this case, of text analysis, which has so many details, so many things to look at. We haven't taken into account, and Brother Parminder has been digging out these elements, and he adds one element to another element, and other element, and a new element. And maybe we understand one element and we incorporate this in our study, and this is all we do. We do compare and contrast. It has been very prominent, and maybe the most important thing to take away with for our generation. But still, at least we need to have a grasp and an understanding of what we're doing. All right. And in this text analysis, what I'm trying to say here is we jump to the analysis of the text without even understanding what we are analyzing. So when we analyze the text, one thing we have to do is, what is the text? How we establish a text? What are the limits of the text? And what Bible are we using? Or what text are we reading, actually? And when we do this, we need some awareness of the quality of the text. Because if you go directly into the King James and you translate, blessed are those that keep the commandments, and then you do a study on that, maybe it would make sense to understand that this is not a very good translation. It works in the book, and perhaps it's not such a big difference if you take blessed are those that wash their robes, but I think you get it, right? It's the better your text is, the better will be your interpretation, and at the end of the day, the application we can make from the text. All right, I think I finished right on time for the main part of my presentation. how do we proceed? Do we finish here now with a prayer, or do we just continue directly into question and answers if there are any?
Thank you very much, Elder Marco. I guess I'll just open it to the floor to have question and answer. If anyone has any questions that they'd like to pose or clarifications.
Elder Marco, are you saying that the King James Bible isn't as reliable as we're thinking, or am I misunderstanding that? And that we should experiment more with other versions.
Yeah, it sounds nice as you put it, experiment. Yeah, I definitely would suggest to use other versions, because the King James is from 1600. It represents the scholarly level of the 17th century. It did not have all the manuscripts available as we have them available today. They just hadn't been found. Yes, there's a big variety of Old Testament fragments, of New Testament fragments, and the King James translators did not have all of them. Why do you think that Ellen White started to use other Bibles than the King James Version? There was a need. If the King James Version was all, she wouldn't have needed to do it. Why do you think that Elder Parminder basically never reads the Bible any longer, but he how does he say, he paraphrases the Bible? Yeah, he's just doing that. He's doing a new Bible translation. He's not reading from a NEV, for example, or something like that, but he's doing that. Yeah, there is a need to put the Bible text into our language to make it understandable, and this is nothing else than using modern Bible translations, and at least not to have this vision of the King James as the only infallible, best ever translation of the Bible into English.
I have another question, and maybe it's something based on something that so like the studies that we've done in the past, more so kind of talking about, the Seventh-day Adventists in Ellen White's time. I used to be of the thought that, some of the understandings that we came to as Adventists, from our understanding of the sanctuary, 2300 days and all that stuff, that you could only prove text with the King James. Are we still, and I guess I've tried it in the past to kind of use like NIV or some of the other modern translations to like study some of, and you can't prove text in the same way, or it's hard. I don't know. If I don't know if you get what I'm trying to say,
yes.
Or what I'm trying to ask.
Yes, of course. The King James has something which is really nice. It uses a word consistently throughout the whole Bible. Yes. For example, we did this 2016, 2017. We took this word tarry. Remember? The tarrying. And then you can find in the whole Bible in different stories. It's always there. It's always the same word used consistently. You can make such a nice study.
Mm-hmm.
But I think as we are seeing now, this is not necessarily a correct study, because it's just handy. Yeah, it's just easy to make, and it's just nice, and maybe it's correct, but maybe this word actually in certain contexts does not mean only, or it's not the best version or translation. If you say tarry, maybe it's a little bit different. And I think we missed something. We made it a little bit too easy, I believe. And yes, I agree. if you take a text like Revelation 22:14, blessed are those that keep the commandments, you can make such a nice study to prove this is why we need to keep all the commandments, and this is why we are God's elected people, and why the Adventists, the true church. And if you don't have this text, and it doesn't say this, it says wash their robes, then it's not that easy any longer, but it doesn't mean that it's wrong. Okay, then you have to develop the study. I think we have to develop everything that we say on a very good foundation. And it's rather we lose our foundation or our established foundation now, and we can build it up again and have surety in what we say, as in the future when we are confronted by other people who show that it's just a not so good translation that we've been using, that's outdated, or the better texts are available already. And most of the things, these things, by the way, they are not based on ideology. The scholars do not push their version because they believe in this and that. These things, they you can show them from linguistics, you can show from history, you can show them and prove why the word is better than another word, for example, or why this text should be used rather than that text. So this is it's a science, and maybe we have to confront these issues that you say, and be open just to even reformulate many of our established and cherished trains of thought that we had.
I think about, a lot of the stuff that we, I don't know, I guess maybe it's just me, that I have imbibed in, or that I've felt strongly about in the past. I mean, I can remember studying with people to show that, going back, showing that these new versions weren't based on the right manuscript. I don't know if you've heard of that study before, where you show that the King James came from the Textus Receptus, received text, and the other, because this is something I think that kind of bothered me in the past, is that I know I repeated it, but always in the back of my head when I looked at the history of the other versions, the other versions seem to be based on, to have more references, if that makes any sense. More manuscripts that,
yes.
When you're in school and you're learning about writing papers and so on, you're told that, basically the legitimacy of a paper that you write is the more references, like other scholars that you're able to reference within your piece of work, means that your paper is stronger. And so when we did this, well, at least me, when I did the study on the versions, that the King James was good because it came from the received text, and all the other ones were bad because they used several references, which was the complete opposite to, how we judge what's good and what's bad from an academic perspective. I'm not sure what my question was. So what you're saying is that it's good that these new versions have several references, or have the bigger variety in reference. I don't know if I'm posing the question correctly.
Yeah, when they have varieties, this is basically, it's just, these translations, they are not academic papers. Yeah, it's not a study or something like that. It's not an investigation. Yeah. They just include as a reference other readings. And they say, in the Textus Receptus, for example, it would be translated like that. For a reason, they do not put this translation as the main text, but they reference it. All right. So in many cases, it leaves to the reader to make up his mind on what is the trustworthy or the best translation of this specific word or sentence. But the received text is really, I think no scholar today thinks that this is a good text. The New King James Version, one of the big critics this is made upon the New King James Version, is that it still uses the text as the received text. The received text is a very new New Testament text, and it was not a complete New Testament text. So I could speak about this separately, but it's really not a good translation. There's common understanding and agreement on that one, and it demands that you have other translations. And what is used today, you may have heard, when translators do a Bible translation, they do not go, or seldomly, or not frequently, or not many, they do not go into the photographs of the fragments.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So they use a New Testament, which is called the Nestle Aland, which is something like a text receptus. It's the best versions of all the fragments put together into one Bible. You can buy it. It's in Greek, and from this one, it has all the commentaries, it has the alternative readings, and then from this they translate into the language. So yeah, I don't know. Did I answer? Sister Tamara?
Yeah, you did. Yeah, you did. Sorry, I know Tamara has her hand up, but it's just for sure. I feel like this is something that's making me feel a little bit foolish, kind of going back to all the conversations I've had about Bible versions. But it's a good study, though. Do you know what I mean?
I used to do.
Yeah,
I had classes in the past where I would take, look, this translation. Yeah, this is a Spanish translation, modern translation, and I would show the students why this is such a bad translation. And I bought so many Spanish translations in order to show why these are bad, why you cannot trust in them, and why we need to use the Spanish King James, which is the Reina Valera, which is the best. It's all wrong what I've said today. I do not agree any longer with nothing of that. Yes, and I'm using this translation, which I like because it looked so nice. Yeah, I like this Bible, but I wouldn't use it because it's just the best translation. And today, when I read the introduction, I read everything that I believe how a translation should be. Yeah, it's a pretty good translation. I think we have to revise things, and many things. This is why I mentioned Walter Veit. We have from him. Walter Veit, he produced this idea of the bad modern translations, which incorporated new theology. Perhaps you have heard about Westcott and Hort, which were supposedly Satanist, something, things like that, all conspiracy theories, all wrong stuff, which formed our idea that there's just one trustworthy translation, King James.
Oh yeah, this has definitely been a lot of humble pie for me. Not gonna lie, but thank you, appreciate it.
Okay, Sister Tamara.
Yes, Elder. First thing before I ask my question, I am really grateful for the new light on hermeneutics. And one of the reasons for my gratefulness is that in time past, when I'm doing a study, sometimes searching through Ellen White for more information is limited, as well in the pioneer's writing. So I'm really grateful. The other thing is you have brought out the point, and sometimes when I'm reading Ellen White's writing, I can see that she would get information from others outside of the Bible. And you have made the point where she have done so. She would do other search in other Bibles, etc. But then I remember it was a long time though, reading a quote from her saying that we are to use the King James Version. But then why did she say that in her writing? Because I take that as an evidence that we are not to use any other Bible outside of King James. And do you know why she said that? Because maybe I missed, or anybody else here, maybe I missed some point in when in her writings, or maybe I interpret what she said incorrectly. I don't know, but I'm here thinking about it, that why would she do other outside of the King James? She used search outside of the King James Version, but at the same time, she said that we are to use the King James Version. For me, it seems as if we are not to use other interpreter of the Bible.
I don't know what quote you have in mind specifically, because why do I say this? There is a text written by his son who answers to the question if Adventists should use only the King James or something like that. And then he says that his mother told him, encourage people to use other Bibles. I think it was the American Standard Version that came out around that time.
Yeah,
Something
she quoted the American Standard Version a lot.
Yeah,
in her
and
writings.
actually she quoted quite a lot. It's not one text here and there. It's quite a lot of use. And there's a text online, I think it's from the Biblical Research Institute or so, which goes a little deep into this and how many times, how many percentage she used this or that Bible.
Yeah.
She didn't use only the American Standard Version, she used other versions as well. So by her own example, you can also show that she did not mean that. She did not stick to this if she really meant that, you know.
I think that was one of my biggest frustrations, is that as a conservative, you encourage the use of spirit of prophecy. And then you also believe only in the King James Version, but then you got into trouble because you bring up spirit of prophecy quote after spirit of prophecy quote, which wasn't King James Version. And so that was something I always struggled with, was that, we have to use the King James Version, but the prophet of the Lord is using all kinds of versions. How do I explain that? And why does she do it? And it was always kind of a unresolved issue that I had with using
Yes.
spirit of prophecy.
Yes, since we do not have, since we are aware that we should not have an ideological approach to these things, well, you are free now to look at this issue and, for example, using common sense or using science, and to find your answer to this question. And do not use Ellen White, even without understanding perhaps why she says it, but she says it. So therefore, King James only. No, you can go to science, you can use common sense, and then you come to the conclusion pretty quickly. You should be able to, I believe, that it's not King James only. If you want, then still you can do a study on why did Ellen White say this. And I believe that you need to incorporate translations available on that time period, circumstances, and several things. When did she say this? What period of her ministry did she say this, and etc. But by the simple fact that you can show that she used very often other translations, and by the statement from her son that she encouraged the use of other translations, you already can come to the conclusion that she really is not on the standpoint that we just should use the King James only. And today we know it doesn't make sense. It's not a very good translation in everything. It's a good translation, but there are problems. Yeah.
Because then I've never come across, if Tamara has the reference, I've never come across a passage where she says the King James or it's otherwise known as the authorized version is to be the only one used. I haven't come across a quote that says that. I think I recall that being one of the challenges when I myself was teaching King James only, is that Ellen White, in both she used she used the authorized version or King James version the most. She did use it the most, but she by no means limited herself to that version only. And there were two challenges when again, when I was teaching the King James only position, and the two challenges were one, her lack of direct counsel on the issue, right? I couldn't find a statement where she directly said, this is a version to use and this isn't. One, there's the lack of direct, and two, her own example where she used a variety of versions. Those were always the sticking points when trying to teach a King James only position. So I see Tamara, you have your hand up. I don't know if you have any more to say to that.
Yes, I'm thankful for the clarification. And Elder Marco, sorry, I really appreciate what you did. For me, it has established, your study has established more on the importance of using hermeneutics, and even your evidence, the evidence that you have given me. I am thankful, and I pray that your study will be, your information on the hermeneutics will be able to share to others, because it would be great to have that information that you have.
Yeah.
Can I ask?
Thank you.
That chart, the chart with the versions, the like flow chart, was it possible to share that? You said that's from a website or something.
Yes, I found it on academia.org, and I shared with you. I send it to you, Tabo, and you can share it.
Sounds
all
good.
right. So thank you for your input. And I find myself in the beginning of the study, and it's such a big, huge topic. I mean, for example, just to leave you with a visual impression on the problem. I know we are already, we have still a couple of, like 5 minutes. What was it? Yeah. We found this other chart on a website where it ranges the different translations according to the ideology, or how you call it, the philosophy of translation, of the translation behind it. Easy to understand. First, the word for word translation, form equivalence. You have the King James, which basically tries to do this. It translates the word, as it doesn't import so much what the writer, doesn't try to understand what the writer originally tried to convene or to say. It just leaves it to you to find out, and it puts the word for word. There are some that are more extreme, like the New American Standard Bible, or the one that we already mentioned, English Standard Version. I think it has totally its merit, and it's a good idea to have this. So it's our decision to understand the word. But then you have other extremes, like the International Version, which is also very recognized translation, the New International Version, which is more, it tries to make you understand the thought. Yes, and maybe in a Western culture, maybe it's not that big a necessity, especially if you have studied a lot of Bible background, Bible history, if you are related to ancient history, ancient peoples. But if you, in my case, for example, in Bolivia, we have, as you call them, I think, indigenous communities. They have other languages, Aymara, Quechua, and these are groups of people that are quite small, in the thousands, perhaps, and they have Bible translations. And maybe when it says something, it's kind of hard to understand what it means, because you have to not only understand the word, you have to give the whole background, right? You have to give the whole story, the history, and the socio-cultural aspects. And it would be perhaps helpful to have a more thought for thought or equivalence, functional equivalence translation, that would put just in their words, in their culture, some things like a parable or so. So these are, for this reason, today I would say I can't use just one Bible. I have several Bibles. I should use several Bibles. I should read them together. Maybe have my preference, okay, but it makes sense. There are several reasons why it makes sense to use a wider range. All right. Anything else? Some comment? If not, I hand over. Thank you.
No, I think that's, for me, that was really a powerful study for me. I definitely know that's something I wouldn't have done for myself, because I don't have as much patience with digging into history like that. So I'm very grateful for that study and kind of the simplicity in which you delivered it. I always appreciate that about how your delivery style. It's easy to understand and easy to stay engaged. Tamara, you're unmuted. Did you want to say something?
Yes, Sister Sakai, I'm with you. 100%.
Yeah, so we always enjoy having you, and I wanted to say I find with several people now who speak other languages, they always give disclaimers because they're, I don't know, afraid that we won't understand them, or that their delivery will be too slow for us or something. They won't find the right English word. So I guess I wanted to give you some reassurance that I personally enjoyed everything, and the way that you, I actually find sometimes people who speak other languages are easier to understand, just because they simplify the way that they say things, so I appreciate it, and it's not something to give a disclaimer for. It's a blessing, and it's really an advantage, I think, more so than anything else. So we appreciate your switching languages for us today. Our only disappointment is that we didn't get to see Solange's face, but that's okay. I don't know if she's listening or not, but you'll let her know that we miss her, and we appreciate her lending you to us.
I think she was there for a while, but we had parallel study also in our Spanish groups, so she started the study. This is why she's been absent mostly.
Sounds good. Well, you let her know that we miss her, and we're thank her for us that she was able to lend us her husband for a few hours. That's it. I think we would love to extend the time and spend more time with you, and we'll definitely be inviting you again if you'll indulge us. Yes. Yeah, I will close with prayer, I think.
Thank you.
Father in heaven, thank you, Lord, for this time that you've given us, the study that really has been opening our minds in a very powerful way. Thank you so much for having patience with us and teaching us and giving us the courage to relearn things. Help us, Lord, now with this new information, or this information that we have now and that has been laid out in such a impactful way. Help us, Lord, that we can embed it into our lives and just in general be better Christians. Thank you for Elder Marco and Sister Solange and the work that they do, their ministry there in Bolivia, and all the different people across the world that they're able to touch. And thank you so much for this opportunity that we had to fellowship with Elder Marco and to hear from him. We pray, Lord, that one day we'll be able to fellowship endlessly, but for today, we do have limitations to the time. So I'm grateful for the Sabbath, and I pray that you'd be with us in the remaining hours of our Sabbath, wherever we might be calling in from today. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. All right.
Amen. Thank you. Was a blessing. Enjoyed it.